Good afternoon, everyone. This is the July 11, 2025 meeting of the Legislative Study Commission for the Environmental and Health Impacts of PFAS Compounds. I'm Chris Bandasian chairing the meeting, and we have a quorum, so we'll proceed as an official meeting. We welcome Ray Brislin to our meeting. It's been a long process to get him approved. I'm not sure that there's officially Senate President confirmation at this point, but we welcome Ray. We are going to pass on minutes of the June meeting to make sure that there's a link to all the information that was presented there. In terms of membership update, again, Ray's joining us, and we're almost at full panel. And that brings us to the DES update, and we have Andy Fuller here covering for Mike Wimsatt. So take it away, Andy.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Fuller, and I'm at DES and the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau. For those that don't know me, I am the project manager for the St. Gobain Performance Plastic site in our bureau. I will be providing the update for the commission that's typically provided by our director, Mike Wimsatt. Starting with Air Resources Division update, St. Gobain has requested to terminate their permit as I've reported in the past, but no action has been taken on that request to date. And that's their air permit, and they'll be required to continue satisfying all reporting requirements and submit emission fees prior to its termination. With respect to facility closure, as everyone's aware, in August of 2023, we were notified that St. Gobain would be closing the Merrimack facility, and they completed all their manufacturing operations and removed all equipment from the facility in 2024. October of last year, they announced their plans to demolish the building, and that demolition has been conducted over phases during the last 9 months or so. And as of July 2nd, the demolition of the facility is nearly 100% complete. All materials have been removed from the property and disposed, and the only remaining work to be completed includes decommissioning of a transformer that's located to the south of the facility. That's anticipated to occur later this month. It's our understanding that the transformer, it does not contain PCB oil or anything, and it needs to be drained of that oil prior to its removal. St. Gobain also needs to decommission the final stretch of sanitary sewer piping, which is located within the railroad right-of-way. So they have been having, they've been trying to correspond with CSX to get that wrapped up. They've notified the town, closed out the demolition permits, and the fencing and security cameras are going to be remaining at the property. The former building pad is going to be the only structure remaining at the site, and as we've discussed previously, evaluating the potential for leaching of PFAS from that concrete is something that they've been doing. Our understanding is that they're going to be completing this using the EPA's the LEAF methods and guidance, and through a simulated rainwater runoff test. I believe it was last month during the update, Ms. Costello had inquired about the LEAF method being utilized because it had been recently updated. I did confirm with St. Gobain on that matter, and they're using the method published in 2017. What they indicated to me was that the 2024 updates are still draft and they're not quite published, so they did not incorporate those. And we have been receiving periodic updates and reports for the work and the process. And we've requested that they provide a final demolition decommissioning report to the state, which we would expect to probably see a little bit later this year. I don't know if there are any questions on the building decommissioning now, or if I should move on to other updates.
Maureen, yes, we do have some questions.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that report. I'm looking at the July 10th, 2025 Union Leader, a very informative article here covering a lot of what you just said. But what's not contained in this article are timelines. For example, in here, it says that, for example, DES will be evaluating the concrete floor. You mentioned decommissioning. Any idea as to the time frame for these last final chapter cleanup projects? Thank you.
I don't have a time frame on the final kind of evaluation of the concrete pad. The decommissioning of that transformer should happen later this month, and the sanitary sewer is being held up just due to the correspondence with the railroad. It's not very easy, but other than that, the sanitary sewer has been completely, it's been grouted up and is sealed off. So there's actually only about a 15-foot section that's close to the railroad that's being dealt with. As far as the pad, that is ongoing. I know the last time we had spoken with St. Cobain, those samples had been sent off to the lab, so I don't know if they've been received yet. So St. Cobain is going to be receiving those. They'll have to receive those from the lab before we would get any of that information. But we have been pushing them to share all the data that they've collected, which would include, the concentrations of PFAS in the concrete, in addition to, their simulated rainwater testing, runoff testing, and then whatever analysis they get with the leaf methods. But I don't have a firm timeline, so I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Amy.
Thank you, Andy, for getting back to us about that. That was my question last time. Do you know which lab they're using?
No, I don't know which lab that they're using. I know that it's being completed by Ramball, their contractor. Ramball is the one that's been conducting their rainfall, simulated testing, but I don't know which laboratory that is.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Gary first.
Okay, and then this is Wendy. Yeah, okay, I'll wait.
Are you satisfied with how they're looking at the pad itself, but also looking at the ground underneath the pad, and the technique they're using to test it, both at the surface next to the pad, but also at depth, or various depths?
So far that information has not been shared with us. So I'm not going to say that we're satisfied with it, but when we have that conversation, so we haven't had a chance to really, I guess, evaluate what they've done. I know that they've sampled certain depths into the concrete, but I don't have that data yet. So I can't say, yeah, they're doing a great job or not.
You don't know what technique they're using.
I think the leaf methodology is standard is what my understanding.
Okay.
That's something that's been published by EPA for a number of years, and there's certain modifications to it that they're using. So I think that is it. And as I indicated, as another kind of side evaluation, they're doing this simulated rainwater runoff testing. So that I think they actually took a piece of the slab and they're kind of running water off it and collecting samples. But I don't have all the details beyond that on what they're doing.
Thanks.
Wendy, and then Mindy.
Yes, thank you. My question is, are there any plans to follow up with blood tests on these workers? I know that there was a dry period and they were actually wetting down the soil to keep it from blowing away, but these guys have inhaled an awful lot of PFAS dust. So I'm just wondering, are there any OSHA requirements, or does the state have any plans to test them for PFAS in their blood, anything like that?
We have not had any discussions with them on that. That wouldn't be something that myself in Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau would really be involved in, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Mindy, go ahead.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for that info update. And I maybe this was covered in prior meetings. Because this site has such a long history, prior to this was GE and other things. The slab, are we pretty confident that any floor drains that were previously contributing to any sub slab contamination, or any concrete features, maybe old sort of holding tanks beneath the concrete, are not continuing sources of pollution that remain in place? I mean, I still am sort of wondering why they just won't pick up the slab or aren't being made to pick up the slab and take it away, or piping or anything in place that historically or now that maybe could be still leaking.
Well, I would say that anything that was released is still at the site, right? There has not been, that we're in the process of going through the remedial action plan. They're submitting that. I know, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but there hasn't been any remedy yet so far. As far as leaving the pad behind, it wasn't, we didn't really have the legal authority to tell them to decommission the building in the first place either. I don't think that we have a legal mechanism to force them to remove the concrete pad either. But I think by doing these analysis through the leaf method and their runoff, we'll get an understanding of what that pad would be contributing going forward to additional PFAS contamination, whether it's the soil or to the groundwater in the surrounding area.
A follow-up, please. So that's kind of one part of the question I asked, but the other part was, are there any subterranean below slab fixtures in place still that may be contributing as continuing sources of pollution of any kind? So, all these facilities have piping below ground, they have below ground tanks a lot of times. Lots of GE facilities have concrete old tanks that are, just in place below ground. Are we sure that those don't exist and aren't going to contribute in the future?
I think based off the information we have so far, we've identified, or they've identified what they can. But I think that's something that we always I don't want to say we're open to, but I think that there have been some preliminary discussions on, now we have access to this pad, and can we get below it and really get a better characterization of what might be below the concrete pad itself and drilling through it. Prior to that, it had been limitations, active manufacturing facility. It doesn't allow for just running a drill rig that can get through a 4 foot thick or 3 to 4 foot thick concrete pad. So
I'm sure either the town or DES has some historical drawings of when GE was there versus
drawings. So I guess that's kind of part of, at this time, we don't think that there are any sources that you're mentioning, Mindy, I guess that are ongoing, continuing sources of contribution to groundwater contamination, other than what's already been identified. So. But yeah, there's very detailed drawings through it being a GE building. There's quite a few of them.
Other questions for Andy? Nancy, go ahead.
Actually, it's not a question. Thank you for that, Andy. I'm just thinking that this brings up the discussion about decommissioning. How disappointing it is that I had a bill last session that would have addressed this, that passed the House and the Senate and was vetoed by the governor. And this is one of those, had this been in place, we wouldn't be having to worry quite so much about this stuff and fighting for it, and DES not having the ability to do that. So I think that will be something I'll be bringing back, and hopefully this governor won't veto it. So just a point of opportunity lost, and here we're, DES is still dealing with this, and the people of Merrimack is still dealing with it. So that's all. I just wanted to comment. And thanks again, Andy, for that.
For reference, Nancy, can you give us the bill number?
I'll have to look it up. I can't remember. It was last session. I will. Thanks.
Other questions for Andy? Go ahead, Rosemary.
Maureen Mooney you had Prime sponsored a bill 1457 or 1547 a few years ago that did get signed by the governor, that required DES to develop rulemaking regarding soils. I believe it was. I was on that. Andy, I'm assuming those rules are in place, aren't they?
Yep, we have implemented, I think it was in December was when the soil remediation standards for PFAS were added to our rule set.
Okay, because one of my concerns too is there's some construction going around in that area, not on the Saint-Gobain site, but I think I mentioned the last meeting there was someone across the street who was excavating soil and just had the soil tested, didn't have to, but they did, and it was really high. And DES contacted Saint-Gobain about managing the removal of that soil. So none of that was covered under the rules regarding PFAS contaminated soil. It wasn't in those soil standards or anything.
Well, it is in the rules, because those numbers, and I have a little bit, I don't want to say too much more information on that in my update going forward, but I will bring that up towards the end. But yeah, the constant they did, there's some development going on a parcel across the street, and the developers tested that soil, doing the correct due diligence to protect their liabilities, and there were PFAS concentrations that were pretty high in the soils. They did not exceed our direct contact, but they were a little bit higher than what we had anticipated for them to be there, but they are above our soil remediation standards. So Saint-Gobain is required to remediate those, which is why we had put them in contact, the developer in contact with Saint-Gobain. The developer is under a pretty a time crunch, so they're trying to kind of work through this stuff, and they're trying to find. We're trying to work with them to come up with a suitable option for how we can deal with that soil, because there's about 4,500, maybe 5,000 yards of soil there.
But in the rules, there's no requirement for a deadline on removal, or it leaves it open to Saint-Gobain to decide when they're going to remove it?
Yes and no. There's certain mechanisms we can go into contaminated soil stockpiling, which I think has like around a 6-month time frame, which is not as fast as what the developer needs us to kind of move at. So we're trying to get creative to help them get their development project and have Saint-Gobain be dealing with this soil. But there's also the fact of them digging up this soil and disturbing it beforehand. So it's not completely clear and cut on how we can manage this.
Other questions for Andy on Saint-Gobain site and the activity? I just have one quick one, Andy. With all the demolition activity, both equipment and materials, has something been done on site to stabilize the ground, or are they graded and loamed and seeded or anything, or is it still disturbed? It's hard to tell from the road.
I believe they've reseeded it, so they've stabilized it that way, but there hasn't been much more than that done. So,
okay, all right. Why don't you continue with your update?
Okay. So their contractors, Second Wind Water Systems and Culligan Water, have been completing POET installations for residents within the consent decree boundary. That started in late 2022. There have been approximately 831 properties identified under term sheet attachments for alternate water being offered to POET. And as of the beginning of this month, there's been approximately 712 of those systems have been installed. The remaining properties are those that have either been non-responsive, or could be a non-standard installation, or they could have been a more recent notification of eligibility, which would include the last term sheet attachment. Their contractors have been performing periodic maintenance on those systems just to ensure effective operation, and we are receiving annual summary reports for this effort. The most recent one was submitted to us in May, documenting the installation effort along with all the maintenance conducted through March 2025, which we're in the process of reviewing. They have been completing construction work for water line installations and connections to existing mains within the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, Londonderry, and Merrimack. With the final paving being completed in April, construction associated with the Hillcrest Road water main extension area in Litchfield has been considered complete. Saint-Gobain has discontinued bottled water deliveries to owners in that area. They began construction in late summer of 2024 for water main extensions and connections for in the Merrimack area, which would include the Wildcat Falls, Brenda Lane, and then their service connections. The water main extension and exterior service line connections and interior water meter installation work has been completed at 25 of 26 properties, and those properties have been notified that bottled water is discontinued. The final service connection, paving, restoration for this work is going to be completed over the summer. Contractors have also been completing service connections to existing mains on towns of Bedford, Merrimack, and Londonderry. All these projects are somewhat divided out depending on who the contractor is and who the water utility is. But the exterior service lines and water meters have been installed at 62 of 70 properties for those areas. And we did confirm for some of the more recent term sheet attachments, which includes 23 through 25, but there's about 11 properties on those municipal water they're proposed for municipal water connections, and Saint-Gobain's been proceeding with water line work for those properties as well under either existing contracts through change orders with those contractors, or they're issuing new contractors, and the work on those properties is proceeding. They continue to work with the water utility in the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of the water line extensions throughout that town. That's primarily in the High Range Road area. DES has met with Saint-Gobain, the town of Londonderry, and the water utility a few times to discuss the expanded water service in that area, and those discussions continue. We do receive periodic updated proposals from Saint-Gobain to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area. And that follows the initial agreements in April and June of 2022. The most recent term sheet attachment was number 25, and that was received and reviewed by DES in May of 2025. We do expect an updated list of remedies in July of this month. Moving on to water supply well sampling, Saint-Gobain's been conducting long-term monitoring of drinking water wells under what is referred to as their groundwater management zone work plan. And this is to support implementation of a groundwater management permit and the supporting groundwater management zone. In general, this plan is going to result in approximately 6 samples being collected from all of the eligible properties by the end of 2026. They've been conducting this monitoring since the end of January 2025, and as of the July 10th, yesterday, they have sampled approximately 980 properties that were eligible for monitoring. This equates to about 150 to 200 properties per month to meet the requirements of the work plan, and they're submitting bi-monthly status reports on that effort to us. They're continuing, properties do continue to exhibit exceedances of our drinking water standards, and they continue to issue bottled water eligibility letters to those residents. And they're identified to us in monthly alternate water updates. Since the start of this monitoring, there's been approximately 97 additional properties that have been identified exceeding an AGQS for PFOA and offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain. On the site investigation front, as we've discussed prior, Saint-Gobain submitted a remedial action plan as well as a remedial action plan addendum. Both of those were determined not to meet the requirements of EMVOR 60610, and we outlined the deficiencies in a letter last October. We've met with Saint-Gobain since then, and they've indicated that they're going to be submitting a RAP addendum that's going to further evaluate remedial alternatives to reduce contamination at the site per what we had discussed in our letter. Their consultants indicated they've identified some data gaps that need to be addressed to respond to our comments and then prepare that revised addendum. We are anticipating that work plan for that additional work to be submitted for DES review and approval this month. And then we'll be meeting with them to discuss the contents of that. As Ms. Rung, Representative Rung mentioned earlier, we were notified in April of the property owner that's developing the parcel across the street from Saint-Gobain. They did provide the results of the soil testing for that property, which, as we said, identified PFAS contaminated soil. That pile is about 4,500 to 5,000 yards, and that can't be reused on site currently due to their space limitations with their project. We've sent their letter, and we've been continuing our conversations with the developer and Saint-Gobain, trying to assist the property owner so that their project can be moving forward, because as I indicated, they're under a bit of a time crunch from their development standpoint. So that summarizes my update for the commission. So I don't know if there are any additional questions.
I have a comment. This is Wendy Thomas on the phone. Just as a data point, 10 Wildcat Falls. Last time I reported that, so that's my address. The first time they tried to hook us up to public water, they flooded our basement. The second time they tried to hook us up, they cut off the well and they bypassed our whole house filtration system. So they have come back, and now the town water is going through our filtration system. So that address, which is my address, is closed down. It's done now.
Okay, thanks for the update, Wendy. I'm sorry to hear about that frustration. That sounds awful.
I'm kind of used to it, but thank you.
Gary, go ahead.
Gary, you're muted. Sorry.
There we go. Sorry about that. Long term, there's going to be a requirement for testing for some time. Are we going to be tied up in any way with federal monies that are coming down to do this testing? A lot of federal monies, especially chemical testing I understand depends on some federal monies. Is that going to impact us in any way if in fact there's some cutbacks from the feds?
I can't really speak too knowledgeably about that. That'd probably be a better question for Mike Wimsat when he's back. I just don't, I'm not sure. So I'm too
Just we
low
need-
down in the weeds on the
Yeah,
site itself. So
that would, to the long term, is going to be very important, especially in this situation.
absolutely, these systems and the testing is going to be required for, where it's going to be dozens of years most likely. And maintaining the number of point of entry treatment systems that they have in addition to other water systems is pretty significant.
So, thanks.
Don?
Yeah, thanks. Andy, I didn't know if maybe it's a gray area or if there's anything contemplated. I don't think it was specified in the consent decree, but for properties within the groundwater management zone, I know it was the preference of not migrating soils off of properties. Are those properties in the groundwater management zone? Is there any requirement, like any construction activities that are going on, is there any requirement to test the soils? I know that property you were talking about across the street, it sounds like they did that kind of proactively, electively on their part. But just thinking about the groundwater management zone may suggest that soils in that area are more prevalent to be higher in PFAS content. And if there's any kind of requirement to test if there's construction activities going on, and then I assume the soil remediation standards would be applied to those results. And then if there's any consideration of, who's responsible for moving those soils and where they can go. And if those aren't contemplated, I'm wondering if that could be a recommendation from this commission in our annual report to look into those further. I don't know if you have any corrections of anything I said, or if there's any discussion of that going on, but let us know if there is, I guess.
So there are discussions. I don't know if I'd mentioned this previously during an update, but around the 2018 timeframe, we had tasked Saint-Gobain with doing some additional soil sampling throughout the consent decree area. And we had sent them a letter, and then we had worked back and forth, and they'd submitted some work plans to us. But around that time, that kind of coincides with when we lowered our ambient groundwater quality standards. So the drinking water standard got lowered pretty significantly from 70 to 12 for PFOA. So we really shifted focus at that time to making sure that we were understanding where drinking water exceedances are, and so that we could provide people with, that people were provided with alternate water if they needed it. So that's been the primary focus for the last 4 or 5 years. We are now definitely having discussions about the soil. Part of this, this development triggered the, bringing those discussions back to the forefront. I anticipate us reissuing a letter that kind of tasks Saint-Gobain and revisiting those work plans that they submitted, just so that we can get a better understanding of the soil concentrations throughout the consent decree area, because we don't want people moving soil around all over the place when our soil remediation standards are very low and they're leaching based. So what we don't want to be moving is soil that's going to create contaminated groundwater in an area that is not already contaminated, and that's obviously a big concern of ours. But so I don't know, does that answer all of the questions, Don?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got. It's on the radar screen, and I was just wondering if there was anything formally considered at this point, but it sounds like there's probably not.
I see something developing here as we work through this discussion with the property owner, and that really kind of helping set precedent for how we're going to be managing these going forward, because development's going to continue. And
Right.
the Flatley properties are all around Saint-Gobain's property. They're actively doing development through there too. So as far as triggers for sampling, I believe I mentioned before, the trigger really is if it's a large enough project of disturbing land, it has to go through the Alteration of Terrain Bureau. And at that point, they reach out to us and say, hey, people want to infiltrate, they're going to be moving soil around, and then they ask for Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau's input. But for smaller projects, we don't always hear about them, unless maybe if the town reaches out to us, because like a town manager, sometimes zoning boards are, will reach out with questions for us. But
all right. I just had one other quick one related to private well testing. Now it seems like a lot of the wells have the ones I'm talking about with the POET systems. And it's probably in one of the work plans, but I'm just not familiar enough with it. And I don't know if you know off the top of your head, I don't want to put you on the spot, but one question that comes up is after the POET system is tested and confirmed that there's no PFAS in the private wells drinking water to the resident, is there a certain time frame to follow up on future testing? You know, at some point, the PFAS is going to break through the carbon filters, and hopefully it's on the order of many years, but it obviously depends on some houses using more water than other houses. So I don't know if there's like an established protocol on that retesting at all. I'm just curious about that.
Yep, absolutely. Prior to them starting installation of these systems, they submitted a work plan to us that outlined all that information. It varies a little bit based off the concentration of the influent, but at a minimum, every property is to be tested at least once a year to show that the system is operating effectively. Some systems are tested twice a year, and it depends on influent concentrations and what we're seeing. So that's one of the recent report that I mentioned that came in May. Is we're going to be looking at it pretty with a lot of detail because it's starting to build up a few sample sets from these systems so we can understand how effective they actually are and see if we can kind of tease any data out of them for things that we need to understand going forward. But
are most of the installations the twin lead lag vessels in most cases or all cases, or?
Yep, they're all lead lag. It's just there's two carbon systems.
Right.
As part of their evaluation, they do test for other water quality parameters, things like radon, iron, manganese, and stuff like that, just because all of them can affect the operation of the carbon. Radon's going to get trapped on the carbon vessels, and if it's really high, that could create another set of health issues for people if we have radioactive buildup. So, but they do need to understand what those other naturally kind of occurring contaminants are, just so they want to make sure the carbon runs as effectively as possible for as long as it can. But there's also a time frame on how long any of the carbon vessels would stay in the house before being completely removed anyway. And I can't recall if it's either 3 years or 5 years before, just even if there was no breakthrough, they would change out the carbon just to be safe.
All right, thanks a lot.
Rosemary?
I just want to make notice that Kim Queenland, who's representing the select board in Litchfield, has joined, but she's on my link. So I sent you a message. I don't know if the organizers can change her name, but it was on my link. And just to make sure that she's added to the distribution. Thanks, Chris.
Nancy, go ahead.
Just when the dog started to bark, it was so quiet here. I just wanted to update you that bill that I mentioned before, it was 2024 and it was House Bill number 1415, an act relative to PFAS facility liability. And it would have required that any person who owned or operated a PFAS facility where the release of PFAS at or from such PFAS facility resulted in a total combined concentration in groundwater or surface water of 100 parts per trillion or greater. It would have required that that facility would have been subject to the provision of federal regulations applying to the closure, removal from service, or decommissioning of all tanks, piping, containers, manufacturing equipment, waste or wastewater treatment infrastructure, and air pollution control devices used to handle, convey, or otherwise manage materials or waste containing PFAS, and the interior and exterior surfaces of PFAS facility buildings and structures where materials or waste containing PFAS are or ever have been used, stored, treated, or otherwise managed. So that, I mean, it did, made it through the House and Senate and was vetoed by the governor, but I certainly think that it would behoove us to have that in place going forward. So I think I'm going to be refiling it, but that was the bill, 1415.
Nancy, were there any particular industries or was it municipalities that found that objectionable, if you recall?
The usual ones, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, other questions for Andy? Go ahead, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, perhaps not a topic for this meeting, but in a future meeting, discussion on the 2 sections in the recently adopted budget related to PFAS and what that entails. So just putting that out there. Thank you very much.
Having teased that out, Maureen, would you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. In House Bill 2, the final version, which is a total of 162 pages, but there are 2 sections, relatively long titles related to PFAS. I can tell you the first section is on page 117 of that document. It's section 141:377. That is requiring the Department of Environmental Services to establish an application and approval process to determine the prorated compensation amount for each public water system with PFAS detections based upon certain factors. And then the second section appears in House Bill 2, page 140, and that is section 141:375, allowing the New Hampshire Drinking Water and Groundwater Advisory Commission to issue grants, loans, or reimbursements to water systems for impacts related to PFAS contamination.
Thank you. Right. Other questions for Andy? If not, we'll move on to an update from Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, I'm Whitney Hammond from the Department of Health and Human Services, providing an update on the Merrimack study. Dartmouth has finished their contract. Their contract ended on June 30th. We have a draft report that we're reviewing internally and we'll return back to them, summarizing the results of the 4 different components of their contract that we've provided updates on previously. In addition to them having fulfilled the contract, they have committed to continuing to enroll participants in the pilot study between now and I think the end of September, just in the event that they can get more people to participate, which would increase their ability to analyze data and draw conclusions. And then they are, I believe, already planned to come and present to this commission for the October meeting. So they'll be able to join us and share the results of their work and answer questions.
Has there been any publicity about the extension of the date for accepting new people into the pilot study?
Yeah, I know they've got recruitment materials that are still, out and posted. And I don't think that when they did their initial recruitment that they publicized that there was any kind of closing, time for people to enroll. So it's just sort of ongoing open enrollment.
Nancy?
Thank you. Thanks, Whitney. So if the contract ended, who are people to go to? Is it to DHHS to enroll? I mean,
No, it's still, it's on the recruitment materials. I think it's an email address that Dartmouth has. So they're still actively the point of contact and yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Questions for Whitney? Guess not. So I think we've had our legislative update from Maureen already. So if there's nothing further, we'll move on.
I would like to just mention, Mr. Chairman, that the filing period for next year, the dates have been published. It's only 5 days on the House side. So that's September 15th through the 19th in 2025. Again, that is the House filing period for next year's legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to point out. Absolutely. I'm looking for annual report topics. So if anyone has any that they'd like to mention to me at this point, please do. And you can do it offline. I know my own focuses will be on reducing the importation into the state of PFAS compounds and the spread of PFAS compounds within the state. Through a variety of avenues, including through the St. Gobain site itself and other sites with remedial action plans, and through ordinary land use where people are not aware of the potential, which we've talked about today. And on the health side, we very much have focused on phase 4 of the cancer study, but clinical guidance, public awareness, I think continues to be an interest of the public. So those are the main things, but next month we're not meeting. That brings us to September, and it's a pretty rapid approach of the November 1st deadline for getting the annual report in. So please give that some thought, and you can tell us now or tell me offline, whatever you prefer, but we're marching ahead to the next report. So with that, under new business, I thought it would be good to hear from the members of the SB 85 Commission. PFAS is not the only environmental contaminant that we're dealing with in the state, and those exposures and chronic illnesses and how they may interrelate to with PFAS exposures. I think there's something of a great deal of interest, but and on the other hand, we don't want to duplicate efforts on this commission. So Mindy has kindly volunteered to give us some background on what they've been looking at. So go ahead, Mindy.
Great. Excellent. Thanks, Chris. For those who I've not met yet, I'm Mindy Mesmer. I'm a research scientist and serve as the chair of the now HB 1171, formerly SB 85, formerly HB 511 commission that started in 2017 as a result of one of my bills, because I was a House representative for at least 2 years. And the commission is tasked with a broader view of environmental issues across the state, not just in the southern New Hampshire region like you all are focusing on. So the charge of that commission is to look at, and I see there's some familiar faces of people who've been on it, and Nancy's on it right now. So, and Amy's been on it, Gary, Rosemary's joined us a few times. So we have, over the past, 9 years, have looked at a variety of different environmental issues across the state of New Hampshire, trying to raise awareness about them, but also the impetus for some of the legislation that has gone through the House in the last 7 or so years. The commission started back in 2017. The first thing that we actually were part of was looking at a pilot study conducted by DES, looking at arsenic and the exposure to arsenic across the state. At the time, I had a bill in that was looking to lower the arsenic rate in ambient groundwater quality standards because of the high rate of bladder cancer in the state of New Hampshire. And that actually, pilot study was the first thing that we sort of talked about in the commission. That later became the broader biomonitoring trace program that the state has undertaken and is still undertaking. So I think that if this commission is looking for other issues that they want to hear about, that would be a good place to start as a presentation from people in that trace program. They look at radon, they're looking at arsenic, they're looking at a few things. So I think that might be relevant to the people in this area as well. We also heard a lot about lead in paint chips, but also lead in drinking water, which is also an issue that has been an issue in Merrimack area. And Rosemary Vaughn knows about this with respect to the schools. I think largely that's been addressed, but that might be of interest to you all. We also heard on the blood lead testing program that the state has been since I think another bill, I think it was SB 547, I believe it was, that I was a sponsor of, put some more framework around that blood level testing program. And so that we heard as well, and I think that might be relevant to this commission as well, because once those kids are exposed to lead in their drinking water or to paint chips, you know, it's important to understand if they have toxic levels of blood lead. The other things we've heard of from are around climate change and climate action. We have heard about radon, especially with respect to lung cancer. So that may be an issue. I'm not sure about how radon, I just heard Andy talk about radon. So I'm not sure, that might be something you all might be interested in as well. Hearing about. We did spend some time looking at the birth defects registry, and I think that would also be something this commission would be interested in, because especially since the funding stream for that registry has been very spotty. I'm not sure what the current status of that is, but I think that's a really important issue to find out about, and maybe some legislative action could help support some of that funding in the future. We heard about cyanobacteria. I know Rosemary Wrong's very familiar with that. Not sure how relevant that is to this commission, but that's another idea. We had a Dartmouth professor come to speak to us, which he's very actively involved. I think some of you may know him, Dr. Stummel. He came and spoke to us from Dartmouth about that, as well as we heard from the DES's cyanobacteria sampling program people about that sampling program effort that goes on, especially in the summers. We also recently heard about AFFF foams and the sampling effort that's going on, especially in the seacoast. I'm not sure, I mean, I'm sure there's high enough levels of PFAS and surface water bodies around the Merrimack area, for sure, because the fish are impacted. I don't know about whether there's foam. We know we see it because of the wave action and things like that on the seacoast and some of the estuarine areas. So that was something we heard about that this commission may also be interested in hearing about if people observe foam in any of the surface water bodies around the Merrimack area. We also had a really important presentation by a scientist from ATSDR on cancer clusters. And he came to speak to us. He has a long history of looking at childhood cancer clusters that I feel like was a really impactful discussion and maybe relevant to this commission as well. And Chris, I can tell you any of these people that you want to get in touch with to do any of these kind of presentations. We also had DES come and speak about landfills and waste deposits in the state of New Hampshire and sludge and things like that. So that was very informative, probably relevant to this commission as well. And we also recently heard about PFAS and fish in the last couple of months. We know that there are some fish advisories in the Merrimack area, so this may also be relevant to this commission. I don't believe you guys have had any presentations on that yet, but certainly that would be relevant. So that is the list of things that I think are relevant to this commission and sort of a broad, so that, just to be clear, that commission is focused broadly on the state of New Hampshire. There's a bit of overlap because we do talk about things in the southern New Hampshire area somewhat, but the focus of that commission is much broader than this one in terms of the spatial and the issues that we talk about. But
Rosemary, go ahead.
All right. Thank you. And thank you, Mindy. I don't know if you know Pat Tarpey. She's the executive director of the Lake Winnipesaukee Alliance. I saw her.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and there's growing concern in her group about PFAS in Lake Winnipesaukee. And she had asked about fish testing. And I remember one of the first presentations this commission had, maybe it was in year 3, was from Dr. Vitale, who was then the toxicologist at DES. And they had completed a fish, I guess a fish sampling effort. It wasn't a real thorough analysis, but they did do some testing. And I'm wondering if it might be worthwhile to do that again, just to see if there is an increase in the PFAS being found in New Hampshire lakes and freshwater fish. That was one issue. And then the other one, even though it doesn't pertain to this issue, I know from Dr. Stommel's presentation, that was like a year ago in January, when he talked about the link to ALS, that research is now expanding to also include other neurological diseases. And in fact, to give more credence to the link between BMAA, which is within cyanotoxin, NALS, that one of the clinical protocols now for treatment is to do a supplement of L-serine to ALS patients. I don't know why it's not being used prophylactically for people that are chronically exposed to blooms, because it is a natural amino acid that our bodies need to make neuroproteins. But it would be interesting to get an update on that in the SB 85 Commission. I'd be interested in participating in that and listening in. But the fish thing, it would be good to see where we stand. I think that testing was done probably 5 years ago.
Well, they came and spoke to us since then. Someone from Dartmouth came and they did a much more expansive fish testing effort. So I could talk to Chris afterwards about who to contact about that.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Mindy.
It would just be good to see if there's been a step increase, because you would expect there would be, since the persistence of PFAS would just be cumulative in fish. Or would it also suggest or compare it also to water, PFAS in water samples. Okay, thanks, Mindy.
Okay.
And I have 2 suggestions for topics.
And
Is that
Wendy, just for to identify you. Go ahead, Wendy.
Oh, Wendy Thomas, I'm sorry. One is, we're talking about testing fish. I've been asking for years, and Lorene Allen has been asking to test produce, specifically around the Merrimack area, to see the PFAS in there. And you can even test chicken eggs. In Italy, they're getting high PFAS in chicken eggs. So that's one topic. And then we're going to have to keep an eye on the federal EPA and what their directives, how they're going to impact us. And I think Don mentioned the funding. I think that's definitely going to have to be looked at. That's it for me.
Okay. All right, Mindy, I'll follow up with you later. Thank you. A lot going on. And so that, I think, unless anyone else has new business, brings us to a conclusion. As I mentioned, we take August off, so have a good summer, everyone. And our next meeting will be September 12th, Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. So, yeah, I'm going to say Rosemary.
Oh, it's well, I'll wait. I wanted to wait till you were done. I just didn't want to, I will have a question when you're done.
Please, go ahead.
I'm trying to get a hold of the approved minutes. You said I could start uploading this to our town site if they were interested in the documents.
Okay, I can get you those, so that may be the easiest way.
Okay.
I always find it difficult to find things on the general court site, and maybe someone can make that easier, but I find it very difficult. So I will do that.
Okay. They actually are looking forward to reading this, which is great to hear.
It is good to hear.
I found a website online, but they only went up to 2022.
Yeah, I can.
Go ahead, please.
Because we're a statutory commission, we have that webpage that you saw that's on there. But to get anything added to it, we have to go through House Legislative Services. And they had, during that period, I mean, probably since 2022, there's been a high turnover of the personnel that supported that site. But since then, DES has a website too. So I actually have a call into Amy. She's on vacation this week. She administers the PFAS program. She sets up these meetings. And because I want to get that Tracy Woods presentation from our last meeting on her website, so I can just link to it to put in the minutes. But also to ask her if there's a way we could just put the minutes on their website. I don't know, but I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's definitely a gap that we have to fill. So, but it doesn't make sense to have them on both places. We should just have like a mothership that houses all those documents. And I'm not sure the Legislative Services website is the best, most timely way to get that stuff up.
So some of those minutes are like 30 pages, on a short meeting. So when we do our round table, they want me to give this information in 2 or 3 sentences. So I would like a point to where they could go to read it, yeah.
That's when Nancy Murphy did the minutes, right? No, it's much better to have them electronically and link, just so if people want to go in deeper into the issue, they can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn from somebody.
So moved.
Motion, I saw Gary's hand, so motion by Gary, say second by Nancy, and if all those in favor, please indicate. So, any opposed? If not, we are adjourned at 2:59 p.m. Have a good August. We'll see you in September. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.